it's quite apt, probably, that Tim and I share the talking duties today, and somewhat symbolic of the collaboration that we've built together. Because over the last 4 years, we've come to work more and more closely together on a number of ever-growing projects. At the moment, there are 35, at least 35 actually, independent funded projects that we're actively engaged in together. So what that means is across both of our organisations, over 180 people are engaged in dialogue. And from a P&G point of view, the company on a global basis are fully engaged in this. We've got collaborations in Beijing, Germany, North America, and of course the UK, working very closely with the scientists at Durham University, as well as working with the research councils across Europe and the UK. And we've got links to the TSB and also the Regional Growth Fund. I'll talk about one of those specific projects later on. There's a bit of P&G jargon at the bottom of this, a win-win-win partnership. What essentially we mean by that is, certainly from the Procter & Gamble side and also from the Durham side, we're looking for a mutually beneficial collaboration. But the third win, typically at P&G, we'd consider that to be our consumers, so they're the people that end up using our products. But in this case, it could equally be considered the government or the funding body or anyone else who's a stakeholder in the collaborations that we're working on together. This is A.G. Lafley, who's our returning CEO. And it's quite interesting that I'm able to put a picture of him up today. Probably about 15 years ago, A.G. Lafley, when he was the CEO the first time around, really kick-started so much of the work that we're doing behind Connect and Develop. He had quite an audacious goal of doing more than 50% of gathering more than 50% of our innovation from outside of the company. And at the time, Procter & Gamble, and I think Michael knows this as well, were very internally focused. We felt as though we could do all our innovation ourselves. So this was a huge change, revolution within the company. We're very pleased to say that now we've exceeded that target by a long way. There's some facts and figures about P&G at the top of this chart here. I won't go into them in too much detail, but you can certainly find out more on the internet. And suffice to say, at the very top of the company, we've got huge support for developing these collaborative partnerships and working externally. So with that, I'll hand over to Tim.
Thank you, Euan. Just by contrast, Euan's just talked about an $80 billion corporation. I've just got some facts and figures here now with respect to Durham University. We are relatively small by comparison in terms of turnover. As you can see, we're just over 250 million turnover business, and a relatively small and compact medium scale university in terms of our numbers. What we are, though, certainly is a research-intensive university, a world top 100 university with respect to our research outputs. And in developing our relationship with Procter & Gamble, we've been very, very strategic in how we've aligned our relationships with business in terms of our university strategy. Euan has talked about win-win-win, and very much our relationship with business is very much looking at how we can best align our strategic objectives as a university with the objectives of our partners. And the two last bullet points on this slide really sort of encapsulate a huge amount of Durham University's strategy with respect to how we wish to engage with business and how we might wish to build those partnerships. We see working with business very much about enhancing and growing the quality of our research, so building upon our existing research base and engaging with very challenging research questions and problems which are both interest to both us as a university and also with our industrial partners. How we want to do that is very much to work in a very collaborative way, very much in the spirit of the open innovation methods and best practices you've already heard this morning. It's very much about doing things together and to do things in terms of co-production. So breaking the old model where you perhaps had an industrial partner who would visit us once every 3 or 6 months to look at progress, but actually working very closely with our industrial partners in terms of developing the work together. We have a number of projects already running with P&G, where P&G are contributing at least half of the research data that we're working with the company with respect to the overall research objectives there. Considering P&G's interests and general academic relationships, our relationship is relatively new. We've been working with the company just over 4 years. And at that point in time, P&G were working with something of the order of 200 other universities. So the question might be, well, why work with another partner? And I think we've come at a time when certainly major corporates are looking very much at this sort of strategic aims and again breaking the sort of model that I mentioned earlier, which universities are looking to develop, but also looking at how they can not necessarily work with just a single academic, but looking at much broader strategic relationships with business. So certainly in terms of our initial discussions with the company, our discussions were to some extent very little about really what were the, I suppose, immediate technical needs, but it was more about the strategic needs of both the university and the company in terms of how potentially we might work together and how we might break the mold in some respects. And multidisciplinarity, I think, is something which is very key to all of this, and also how we might engage with our partners. And it's not the traditional show and tell type relationship where we have a range of disciplines or expertise whereby we are very good at X or Y. It's very much about sharing the problems and actually understanding what the company's needs are, and then actually using our teams. And it may be that we may be constructing teams which involve physicists, chemists, biologists to actually address those sorts of problems. And as we show in this slide, this isn't a simple, very quick relationship. We must have the common interest. We spent a lot of time. P&G were very open and honest with us, which is something which we don't find with all companies in terms of actually being able to tell us what their key drivers were over the next 5 to 10 years. We actually spent something like 3 to 4 months over a summer period actually understanding some of the key technology drivers that P&G had. It's not a quick process, and both parties have invested significant resource in terms of how we've developed this relationship. We've gone down many blind alleys, I suppose, in terms of really just investigating where there are areas where there are touch points with respect to expertise and needs. And it's a case of not being disappointed when you actually hit those blind alleys, but learn from that and actually take them forward into perhaps new applications as well. Obviously, in developing the relation, there has to be something in it for both partners, and I think there are a couple of slides coming which sort of outlines here where the win might be from the perspective of both the university and also the company. The quality of the scientific projects is very much an important driver, and I think it's been very helpful and very interesting in terms of our engagement with P&G. In that the underpinning science that we're able to provide the company is seen as absolutely fundamental in providing the underpinning knowledge which is allowing them to develop a range of new products and understanding of the existing products that they're currently making. We're very keen to be able to demonstrate the impact of the research that we have in the university sector. So having projects of this type where we can actually cite results and the sort of impacts we might be making in terms of new materials, new products, new markets, new applications, whether it's within P&G or with some of their non-competitive collaborators, is also very important to us as an institution. We're working on a range of timescales. We have short-term projects. We also have a number of very long-term projects, and we're able to, as part of this engagement, to be able to provide, I guess, a range of inputs into projects which we will see potentially new products coming out of the pipeline in a period which is beyond the typicals of 1 to 3 year timescale. From a university perspective, linking into a company and providing our students and our postgraduates with the experience of working with a major research intensive company is also very important. So we're able to also address the student employability agenda. We're able to second students onto projects during their summer vacations, and also gain a lot of insights in terms of working with the company in terms of our student base. And quite frankly, it's been a very helpful experience for us as a university working with a company like Procter & Gamble in terms of really building and developing a model which we have extended and we're developing to work with a whole range of other industrial partners. So we have a range of partnerships which are not as well developed as this, but partnerships which have been developed along a similar sorts of lines. If I can now hand over to you to talk about what's in it for P&G.
So in the same vein, it's a hugely productive collaboration that we're developing with Durham, and there's a number of benefits to us in doing this. First of all, having a partner that's committed and aligned to our research efforts, and having the relationships to support that together really allows us to get into a totally new innovation space. I mean, as a company, we're very well served in the areas where we develop our products, but we by no means know everything. And being able to work with a diverse range of highly talented and skilled academics at Durham University really allows us to hugely expand our knowledge base and, as I said, the space in which we can innovate. Within that group, we recognise that both the students and academics represent the top talent in their field. Monthly, we get together, and I was in a meeting this week whereby we had academic staff from the physics department, the biology department, the chemistry department, as well as a student cohort reviewing one of the projects that the students was working on. This sort of cross-fertilisation of ideas is really hugely valuable, and it lets us access these non-obvious connections that otherwise we just wouldn't get to. And it's the scale and the quality of the relationship that allows us to do that. In the same vein, developing new ideas and capabilities on the back of these discussions, and being able to pool and share the capability that's been developed at Durham University, as well as Procter and Gamble ourselves. So having access to those the labs and the equipment, and being able to go in there without going through the bureaucratic process of finding out who owns it, requesting permission. So this open access capability that really accelerates the rate at which we can innovate in the company. And again, by having a strong partner in Durham University, it allows us to access some of the funding that's available for research, which frankly as a company we wouldn't otherwise do. These are high risk but high impact projects that we do need support to lower the bar, or lower the inertia, let's say, to get us started on these programs. But at the end of the day, the size of the prize is often significantly greater than what we would do otherwise. And this is really part of the beauty of how we've organised the work together. By having a master collaboration agreement and an umbrella agreement that covers all the work we do together, if somebody in Procter & Gamble wants to start off a project with Durham, it's not a case of going through the negotiations on intellectual property, on ownership rights and everything like that. Every time we do a project, we know what we've agreed. And because that's in place, it's very quick to pick up an idea, run with it, develop a project, get it off the ground. So that takes, it significantly reduces the barriers to working together, and we view that as a huge benefit. So some characteristics of a successful partnership, and I think if we stopped and thought about this for a moment, I'm sure most folks would come up with many of these, but these have certainly played out in the collaboration that we've developed with Durham so far. And this is a build on the win-win-win statement that I mentioned earlier. Each of the parties can access or get results that otherwise they wouldn't have achieved, and there's some examples there, whether it be intellectual property, publications, bilateral training. Universities are obviously an institution where they provide training. Well, it's certainly two-way in the relationship that we've developed with Durham so far. Certainly we learn a lot from them, but also the students come to our laboratories and we can teach them in some of the practices that we use in industry. It's important that the partnership is viewed to be long-term. It secures the investment, both personal and financial, that's needed on both sides in order to be able to get this off the ground and keep it going. And also, the contacts at all levels are important. It's no good if there's a senior management team talking about it and saying that it's a good idea. I work in one of the working teams on a day-to-day basis, and it's equally important that we've got strong networks at that level so that at every point of interaction it's effective and works well between the two organisations. Very intuitive, but very important is the quality of the relationships. These don't happen immediately, and they are something that we've built up over time. But recognising that certainly helps us from a P&G point of view, where it's quite common for people to move assignments relatively quickly, but we know in order to make these external collaborations work that longevity in position and role and working on the quality of the relationships is absolutely key to making this effective and successful long term. And on the right-hand side of this chart, you know, as I've said already, this functions on many levels, from the quality of the ideas to the innovation space it allows us to access, to the people development on both sides of the collaboration, and also on broadening the scope of the innovation and the knowledge that we create beyond just our collaboration with the public and other non-competing companies too. So, to give a bit of an example, I'm just going to mention briefly SMC3. The genesis of SMC3 was some support we received from the Regional Growth Fund to work on a project between the four partners that you can see here: P&G, Durham University, a local SME named Peerless Systems, who have expertise in automation and robotics, and the Centre for Process Innovation as well. And each of us brought to this collaboration our own unique expertise to develop a series of projects working in the area of surface science and modification. And because we had this critical mass, what we've now been able to do is set a forum for other companies or organisations who are interested in innovating in this field or have an unmet need in the area of surface science and modification. And they can come to us, and if there's any way that we can help them and leverage the capability and knowledge that we've developed, that's exactly what we're aiming to do here. So that's now being run between CPI and Durham University, and what I ought to say is the website is now live, smc3.org, if anybody is interested in finding out a little bit more about that. So I'll hand back to Tim.
Okay, thank you. I think together and deliberately, we as a partnership, a company and university, have worked very closely with our research councils, really to really jointly demonstrate the value of how our activity is working well, but also how we can disseminate and grow our activity. So Procter & Gamble has very close relationships with research councils in both the physical sciences and also the biological sciences areas. And certainly a number of projects that we have been developing jointly together are projects which we have co-developed in very close consultation with the research councils. And well, generally, in terms of how this has actually worked for us and how it will work with other businesses, they've been very useful in terms of helping with those first connections and actually building research base. So as we've built projects and we've built collaborative projects, we've used the research councils quite candidly in terms of developing the sort of additional partnerships if we want to bring in an instrumentation expertise that we don't have knowledge of. We might have gone outside and taken some of the connections through that knowledge base. We've used some of the PhD programs, in particular the case award programs, to start projects, to maybe do some of the early stage research where we might be looking at a more strategic, longer term project. We might have seeded that with a studentship to start to basically understand and demonstrate some of the science that might be needed to be done in that area. We've used the research councils to broker the industry connections, and it's not just the research councils, we've used the knowledge transfer networks to help us with that in terms of finding the right partners and building the partnerships, but also talking to other strategic partners that the EPSRC might work with, the research council in the physical sciences area might be working with respect to build projects which go beyond perhaps areas which may be focused in the consumer goods area, but to give very broad relevance of the underpinning research across several industrial sectors. And by doing that, I think we've used this again to amplify the sorts of results that we can be demonstrating to the UK government research funders in terms of the value of what we're actually trying to achieve. Euan's already given an example of a project which was funded partially through the Regional Growth Fund. I've got another example which I haven't got a slide on, but it's an example of how we managed to build a partnership where we were able to bring in our links within the research councils to build a very broad project which has brought in a non-competitive partner, which in this case is Procter & Gamble with the company Dyson, looking at some expertise that we have in the field of graphene. We can make, Durham actually has technology which is associated with making graphene in a very efficient way, a very cost-effective way. Well, we have a major EPSRC-funded project which involves two major industrial players, Procter & Gamble and Dyson, both of whom have interests in the material properties of that particular product. But we've also brought in another university, Sheffield, who's got very useful expertise in terms of how these materials behave as they flow in polymer materials. But we've also got a spin-out which has come out of Durham, which is a company called Durham Graphene Science, which is the company which ultimately would hope might make that product in the long term. So what we have there is an example of a small SME, two large end users, and two universities working together to develop applications for some really cutting-edge technologies. So, very quick slide in terms of some of the vehicles that we've used. I've already talked about case studentships. We've used impact funding that we have as a university to seed some of the relationships. So some of the funding that we've received from research councils, we've started some projects, we've tested some ideas before we've been able to develop the larger scale projects, to some extent de-risk and build relationships. We've looking to Europe, and we have a couple of European funded projects already which are enabling us to build our reach and to work with different parts of Procter & Gamble, which are based in continental Europe, but also bringing in other companies in terms of developing solutions to broad technology needs. And the European funding is an area which we're intending to build and grow into the long term. Euan's already mentioned the Regional Growth Fund. TSB project funding has also formed part of the mix of what we've done. But also the smaller projects, the student projects, have been important. The fact we've been able to put our chemistry students into the Newcastle Technical Centre of Procter & Gamble in the summer, that's often been allowed us to just develop a couple of ideas which we've then taken forward as much bigger projects into the future. Internships, again, are very important, the exchange of people, and that's an area which we intend to build and grow as our partnership expands still further. And we've also worked very closely in terms of looking at both our school's outreach agendas, both from the university perspective, but also from the corporate perspective as well. And we've combined forces on a number of activities and initiatives, and being able to demonstrate the sort of additional win-win-win through doing that. Then, of course, there's the smaller scale consultancy and analytical services, which sort of happens in the background as we develop the relationship. We've both talked largely about relationships between a university and a corporate partner. I just wanted to finish on the last slide, which is an example on a very different scale. So this is an example of how we're working, but we're applying very, very similar principles to a relationship with a smaller company. This is a company which is called Cambridge Research Biochemicals, which some of you from the region may know of. They're based in Billingham. They have around 20 employees. But the sort of principles and the sort of types of engagement that we're having with this company very much mirror the sort of things we're doing on a different scale with Procter & Gamble. Yes, they're engaging in our impact programs. We've had a couple of secondments where some of our postdoctoral workers have gone into that company. They are engaging in the case studentship programs that are being run through the research councils. They are very, very much engaged in our university enterprise, so we're not only just supporting the company is supporting our teaching within the university in terms of our enterprise activity, and they're bringing very much their small company sort of enterprise and open innovation principles back to the university, so we can better understand that, and particularly the support they're giving to both our chemistry and biology teaching programs within the university. They're employing our graduates. So because we're working very closely, they're actually seeing our graduates at first hand. They are taking our graduates into the company, so we're providing a pipeline whereby our graduates can then go and work within that particular environment. And also they're accessing our university facilities. So whilst it's on a different scale, it is very much a model that we'd like to use and we'd like to be able to develop with companies at all sizes and scale. I think really just finally to wrap up, developing a relationship of this type isn't quick, it's not easy. And I think very much a point I'd like to make is one size doesn't fit all. there isn't just one way of doing it. It just happens to be a way which we've developed some of the principles from which I think are useful to be taken into other interactions. But you know, certainly as we talk to other companies, we can see the differences in terms of how they work and how they innovate. And I think it's a case of really very much a dialogue between the businesses and the universities in terms of how that relationship can be developed. I guess one final point, I suppose, to make before we stop is people and relationships have been very much the driver in terms of this. If the people didn't work well together, that they didn't interact well together, and certainly that they didn't trust one another, these sorts of relationships wouldn't work. So whilst networks aren't everything, it's actually getting the people right and getting the means of interaction right between the people is very important. And then certainly you can then work to develop projects which may succeed in this sort of way. Thank you very much.